So we want to talk today a little bit about hacking human behavior. And we thought about talking about hacking human behavior because Moran was a professional hacker at some point. So what's a professional hacker does?
So this is back in the 90s where there's very few websites that are online with your money in them, talking Amazon and a few banks. And they were worried that someone's going to steal your money or steal their information. So they would hire hackers to try to sneak into the website, change something, move something, steal something, to then show them how to prevent other people from doing the same thing. Now, not always were they aware of this profession. So sometimes it was active marketing where you first break into the bank and show that there's a problem, and then you come to them and you say, no, there was a problem. Please hire someone like us to solve that.
And did you always wait for people to invite you to hack? Or did you hack first and then say, hey, you have a problem, by the way, here's your money, it's in this bank account in the Cayman Islands?
So once I knew someone in the government in Israel, I started doing the second option because I knew that I'm going to be okay. But it started just asking for permission, which meant that it required going higher in the hierarchy first to kind of get the permission. Once I knew that I'm going to be, I have this, this get out of jail card that you can call someone and say, hey, Dad, get me out of jail. Then we started going both ways.
What was the most fun thing you ever stole or broke into?
I never told that. That's an interesting thing. I just remembered that a few weeks ago. In Israel, there's an area in town where a lot of people, usually important ones, get buried, and we stole all the properties of graveyards in this area. So up to very many years after, anyone who would be buried, I would get a notification saying so-and-so just died and they acquired property XY on this thing, because I still had the thing, and I for a while had a really big graveyard under my name.
So is that the reason for your personal wealth?
Yes, I think it's one of the best investments is that, because somehow all people end up needing a property.
So now you're a scientist. What are some of the big lessons in your mind from hacking to science?
So, in trying to think about it, I think that there's three things that hackers need to have, that scientists need to have as well, and also that are kind of bridging between those two. So the first one, and not too surprising, is some technical skills. Like, you've got to know something about technical skills. That's not surprising. The second one is empathy, because you need to be able to put yourself in the mind of someone else. You have to say what mistakes they would make. That's the second one. And the third one is being really detail-oriented, as in writing down everything you do, being aware of everything, and trying not to let your brain navigate you, because it's going to be fooled, but rather write down. Incidentally, I think that this is true also for people who try to observe behavior, and also specifically to people who try to predict one. So technical skills, just a basic need. Empathy, to be able to put yourself in someone else's mind, and then maybe the most important thing, being able to translate behavior into algorithm, so you write down.
So, when I think about behavioral economics and creating social, just behavioral change, I think a lot of it is like that. So there's, just as one example, there's a company called Express Script. Anybody here knows Express Script? Yeah, some of you. So, and it's a PBM. They manage all kind of pharmaceutical benefits. But one of the things they do is, if you have a long-term illness, they might send you your medication in the mail every 90 days. So you have some illness, every 90 days you get your medication from them. And one of the things they try to do is they try to switch people from branded medications to generic medication. So imagine you go to the doctor, your doctor writes you a prescription for branded medication, you start getting the medication every 90 days in the mail, and they try to switch you to to generic. And they try all the standard marketing techniques. They send people a letter saying, please switch, you'll save money, we'll save money, your employer will save money. Nobody switches. They send people postcards and colorful brochure and all kinds of things, and nobody switches. And for 1 year, they wrote people a letter and said, if you switch to generic medication, your medication will be free for a whole year. Right now, you're paying $10, $15, $20, whatever the copay is. If you switch to generic, it will be free. What do you think happened? What was the percent of the people who switched because it was free? Almost nothing. Less than 10% of the people switched. So they came to complain to me, and they came to complain because I wrote some papers about the allure of free, about how much people love free and how sometimes people stand for an hour waiting for a free Ben & Jerry's ice cream, where you will not stand in line for an hour for $1.25, but it's a free Ben & Jerry's ice cream. All of a sudden, it's exciting. So anyway, they came to complain that free is not working, right? You offer people free medication for a year and people don't switch. And I said, look, it's possible that people hate generic medications. But it's also possible that people hate doing anything. Because I said, if you think about the little details of what happened, you started with branded medication, you can continue with branded medication. You Express Script, you ask people to make a choice of doing something different and choose generic over branded. This is what we call a confounded design. Is it about generic versus branded, or is it about returning an envelope versus not? So to test this, we convinced them to do something like the following. We said, what if you wrote people a letter and you say, listen, if you don't return this letter, we will be forced to stop your medication. But when you return this letter, you could choose generic at this price or branded at this price. But if you don't return the letter, your medication is over. So first of all, everybody returned the letter. What do you think was the percentage of people who switched to generics? It was between 80 and 90%, right, depending on the employer. Now, if you think about this, do people like generic or like branded? Well, what we know is that people hate returning letters. Right? If you started with branded, people behave as if branded medications are the best thing in the world and you need a huge force to get them to do something else. If you gave them a forced choice, they behaved very differently. But I think very much like looking at the little details, when we set up this choice for people, we think to ourselves, this is a choice between branded and generic, when in fact it's a choice between returning a letter versus not. By the way, if you think about this, you could say, come on, wouldn't people return a letter if it could save them $10, $15, $20 a month, every month for the rest of their life? Well, think about your own lives. How many of you have some subscription to a cable TV app, something that you should cancel in principle? Right? Now, don't you want to cancel? Of course you do, just not tonight. And when you think about it, like, we could have all kinds of wonderful intentions about how we want to have life, but the actual activities in life are often determined by the small details, which is why if you understand little details of hacking, you can control people's lives.
So I'm curious just about this example that you mentioned, about you and the example. When you hear this story, when this company comes and says, here's our problem, do you see it right away? Did you by now develop the ability to kind of look at the problem and immediately say, wait, I see what the problem is? Or is it something that you still are surprised by every time?
So I think that I get a deeper appreciation. I'm kind of imagining that every human activity just takes a huge amount of effort. Kind of in my mind, I don't think about people coming home. I kind of imagine people coming home exhausted and anxious and with homework and food and so on. And I think to myself, all of a sudden, you want them to open a letter, read, and act on it. Like, when is the time going to happen? But we do try to create procedures for this. So when we do some procedure, we basically try to observe all the little details, and often the little details surprise us. So as another example, we worked on a problem in Africa where you have regular sweet potatoes and you have enriched sweet potatoes. And the enriched sweet potatoes are much healthier, they don't cost more, but people don't seem to want them. And it was unclear what was happening, and we went to the market, and what we saw was that the people in the market sell, the sweet potatoes are piled on the floor. There are basically two piles, one regular, one enriched sweet potatoes. And very quickly, what happened? People just come, they look at the sweet potato, they put it back. Do they put it back on the same pile? No. So in 2 minutes, you have a mix of all the piles. Of course, people can't figure out what to do. So we did something very simple. We just gave people 2 colors of tarps. One darker orange for the enriched sweet potatoes, one regular orange, and all of a sudden people remembered to put it back because it wasn't just a sweet potato, it was a sweet potato from this pile versus this pile. Things change. So it's not always that I know where people would fail, but I think we do get a deeper understanding for the challenges that everything creates. And it's really an interesting perspective. Think about when people are born. We don't give people a living will that when they're born, right? We just assume at some point people will figure this out. It's really difficult to figure out. Most people, Prince, just died without a will. There'll be a lot of, it's kind of a shame that people we don't give them something when they're born that kind of set up life.
Do you have one?
I do have a will.
When did you write it?
Well, life, it's interesting. People actually start doing life changes when they have kids. All of a sudden, there's a reason to start taking action. But without it, I'm not sure what would happen. Anyway, what about you? What's your favorite behavioral hack?
So, I started playing with a new one recently, which benefits from the following. So, in my mind, there are moments when we're likely to change, like moments when we have kids or moments when something dangerous is happening. And changing is really hard. You have to want to, you have to agree, you have to understand. There's a lot of steps, but there are barriers to do that because habits are very strong in us and they make it very hard for us to change even if we want to in theory. One thing that I felt works pretty well is finding moments when you are less resistant and more likely to actually consider options. Turns out one of those moments is when you're sleeping. So when you're sleeping, you're not really there to resist. So your guards are lowered, and then there's also unique windows during the night when you're sleeping where your brain basically rehearses its kind of thoughts and moves them from one place to another. So if we can come in between in those moments, we can actually change a lot in your brain. So here's an example. You take a person who's a smoker, who really wanted to quit smoking for a while, tried a lot of things, but somehow it fails because the desire is stronger and it really looms in our brain and makes us want to do that. You take the same person, you bring them to the lab, and you have to go to sleep. Now you have 7 hours of their brain and you interacting without them to come in between. In those 7 hours, there are specific windows when the brain basically assesses life. It moves information from here to here. Now it's hard to find this moment, but we now know, especially with animals, but even with humans, we know exactly when this kind of process starts. And then we can come between and say, okay, brain, it's you and I. Let's see if we can change the person. And what we do then is we activate the brain's thinking about smoking simply by spraying the smell of nicotine into the person's nose. This makes the brain think, okay, we're in kind of smoking mode, let's consider what to think about. But then immediately after, we blast the brain with the smell of rotten eggs. This basically tells the brain, smoking, bad. It's a typical conditioning that we can do when the person is awake, but suddenly when they're asleep, they're not there to resist, and the brain is listening to both those moments and combines.
Sorry, so you inject the smell of nicotine?
First.
And then some disgusting smell.
Yes, and the brain pairs them, and if you do it enough times, over one night, the person wakes up in the morning, and they have no idea what happened. If you ask them what happened during the night, they say, I don't know, I slept perfectly, it was great, a little bit back pain. And then they walk away, and you just ask them to report how much they smoked in the next week. And suddenly they say, I felt less of an urge to do that. Now, it drops first a lot in the first day. It kind of starts climbing back up. It takes about a week to people to actually go back together, and then you have to do the same thing again. We never tried it in the course of many, many, many weeks to see what sustains. But one night, you have no idea what happened. You change in a way that you yourself tried as an awake person to do for a lot of time and failed. So there's something about this window that actually makes me believe that we can now play with a real hack. It's like going to your brain behind your back when you're asleep and changing.
So are you imagining like that you get the whole country to go to sleep with the TV on the night before elections, and you get some smells out?
So I mean, we're laughing about it because we kind of think, but in a way, those things actually happen. So in lighter version, a lot of times we fall asleep with something and we wake up with a different thought. And we are humans who try to explain ourselves to ourselves. So we come up with an answer. We say, I guess I start to think differently about this or that. But it happens a lot of time that we go to sleep and we wake up with a different thought. Many of us go to sleep next to someone and we wake up with a different thought about the same person. We say, like, this person I went to sleep next to, like, it's not the same guy that I woke up the morning after. And like, what happened overnight? It's the same thing. So, okay, the alcohol maybe decreased a little bit, but also it's the same person and you change. At night is adult.
So actually the whole night perfume industry could flourish based on this. If you just want somebody to wake up and loving you even more, you could do something that releases
the other person has
a little
to stay
bit
up.
Body odor, a little something pleasant, and yeah, that's great.
So I'm seeing, you know, in a kind of a second step, people actually staying up next to someone else, and let's look at it as a positive way, helping them change behavior. So you have to have someone else stay next to your bed and wait for this moment to occur. It doesn't happen if you just do it kind of loosely sprayed smells. You have to find the moments where your brain basically rethinks about life. But I do feel that this is a new industry that could emerge of people saying, look at me and help me.
So that's an amazing, it's brainwashing.
So we titled our session "Changing Behavior in Moral and Immoral Ways." So I really try to suggest always the moral ones first, but it's absolutely true. So now
where is the moral one?
So we changed stopping smoke and making people eat healthy, and so we focused on those when we tried to write a grant and also demonstrate what it's about. But everyone clearly sees the problem of doing things that you don't want in those moments. And I think that it's pretty new. We know about those abilities for maybe 2 years. The neuroscience is really there in understanding what is the window and what amount of spray you have to smell you have to spray. And so we only know there's a lot of details there that actually make a difference, but it's new. And it wasn't exploited to the best of my knowledge yet. But we can immediately see someone sitting here and say, this is a great idea of a way to sell more Captain Crunch by spraying this beautiful smell and then of Captain Crunch, and then immediately after the smell of roses, and you're going to wake up wanting that more. And this is probably true. We don't try that in the lab because it's going to be harder to justify, but I think that changes can go in either direction. If you want to talk about the immoral ones, we can certainly make people vote a little bit different, or come up with wake up in the morning and say, I think now that I see why this is not a bad idea as I thought before I go to sleep. Or waking up and saying, now that I think about it, Captain Crunch is really, really good. I love $6.99. So
I think my favorite kind of change in human behavior is probably the complete opposite. It's not the unthoughtful that you don't know happens, but it's something incredibly deliberate. So think about the temptation we all have in life. Life is basically tempting, and life is actually getting better at temptation. And we fail all the time. So think to yourself, how often do you fail in terms of temptation? For example, how many people here in the last month have eaten more than you think you should? Few. Exercise less than you think you should? Okay. Now, please be honest. How many of you have ever texted while driving? Come on. And it's incredible because people admit this is incredibly stupid. Nobody says, you know what, I thought about it carefully, I weighted the costs and benefit, and I decided to do it. How many of you in the last month have not always washed your hands when you left the bathroom? By the way, this is amazing because you just admitted texting and driving, which is much more stupid. But somehow admitting not washing your hands, that's one. That one we're not willing to do. Okay, so you wash your hands all the time. By the way, physicians don't wash their hands about 50% of the time when they move between patients. Let's try one more. How many of you have ever had unplanned, unprotected sex? 2 hands, okay. Now, if you think about all of those cases, these are kind of interesting cases because these are cases where we know that the things are wrong, but it's very hard to think about the long term. So one day in my class, this guy came. He was the CEO of a company called Panda Express. Anybody here has ever eaten in Panda Express? Yes. They sell something called orange chicken, and they sell other things, but mostly they sell orange chicken. And orange chicken is one of the worst health hazard you can consume. It's fried twice, it has salt and sugar. It's just incredible how unhealthy it is, but it's also delicious, which is why people eat it. And Tom came to me and he said, what do I do with orange chicken? I would love for people to eat better things. There's beef and broccoli, there's all kinds of other things. Like, this is the worst possible thing we do. Like, why can't we get people to eat something else? So he gave us a store to play with. And the first thing we tried to do was to post calorie information on the menu. Every item, calorie information. What do you think happened? Absolutely nothing. New York City, by the way, then replicated the experiment. They forced every fast food place in New York to post calorie information. Also, nothing happened in New York City. Actually, it's not exactly true. There were some neighborhoods that people started eating worse. In low-income neighborhoods, what happened was that the display was calories and dollars. And all of a sudden, people were trying to maximize calorie per dollars and eating worse things. But in general, it didn't work. It didn't work. By the way, the US government just passed a law that every restaurant in the US that has more than 20 branches has to post calorie information on all their menus, and this is unlikely to work either. And it creates a cost, right? It means you can't adjust your menu based on local ingredients, seasonality is more complex, and so on. We have this instinct that calorie information would work. Actually, we have the instinct that information would work. Here's a challenge, actually, for you to think about it. Think about one big change in behavior, not for one person, but across society, that was brought about by giving people information. Really hard to think about a single one that was just information. Certainly not cigarettes, certainly not driving. I mean, just think about it. Come to me later if you have one. So anyway, so calorie information doesn't work. And partially doesn't work because kind of people knew already, right? Nobody walked into McDonald's after this law was passed and said, my goodness, I had no idea. Up to now, I was sure this was health food. Why didn't anybody tell me? Now I understand this. So the other thing we tried something called Ulysses' contract. If you remember the story from the mythology, Ulysses knew that if the sirens will come, he will kill himself and all the sailors. So what did he do? He asked the sailors to tie him to the mast. This way he could hear the call of the siren, but he couldn't act on it. And he asked the sailors to put wax in their ears. And this way the sailors themselves kind of were unaware the temptation happened. And you can think about probably all kinds of versions of your own ways in which you're doing this, right? So if you don't buy chocolate cake, you say to yourself, I know that my future self would eat too much chocolate cake. I want to prevent my future self from eating too much chocolate cake. I will not buy it. If you made an appointment with a trainer in the gym, you're doing the same thing. You're saying, I know that my future self would not want to exercise. I'll wake up in 10 days not feeling like it. But if I paid $150 for a trainer, I would also be stingy. I will not want to waste the money, so I will force myself to go. So Ulysses contracts are all about knowing that our future self might misbehave and forcing ourselves to behave better. So we tried multiple things. One of them was with Panda Express. People came to Panda Express and we said, would you like to get half a portion of rice today? And with that, you will save about 250 calories from your diet. About 30% of the people said yes. Now, if you think about it, what's the benefit of doing it? You could tell yourself, let me just leave half of the rice later. But if we know that we're not going to do it later, a third of the people said, yes, give me less food, and they actually ate less. The people who took the whole portion ate the whole thing. But here's the other curious thing. Some people came back. So imagine you came one day, we asked you, would you like half a portion of rice? You said yes. You came back another day, and then I don't ask you this time if you want half a portion of rice. Do you think anybody said, oh, you know what, yesterday, the last time I was here, somebody offered me half a portion of rice, can I do this again? No. Nobody came up with it on themselves. But if we offer to them again, they wanted it. So it's kind of an interesting thing that when somebody offers us like a behavioral hack, we sometimes recognize the wisdom of this and take it on, but we need to be offered. And again, think to yourself, how many of you, when you go out, you think that the dishes that you're served are too large? We all think so, right? How many of you think it will be better for your health if you could say to the waiter, you know what, today I feel like 85% of the regular dish, or 75%, put the rest in a doggy bag, right? It will be great, because if you get the whole dish, most likely you finish the whole thing. But it's not part of the script. But if the waiter stopped you and said, this is the dish, by the way, what percentage do you want on your plate and what percent do you want us to give to the poor, put in a doggy bag and so on, people would act differently. So I really like the self-control notion. I like this idea that we have some insight into our ability to fail, and if we're given some tools, we can behave better.
So I know that you are also playing with creating such scripts. You actually play with ideas of creating all kinds of rituals and scripts that help people do it. Tell us a little bit about that. Like how do you do that technically?
So before this, I'll tell you, we're trying to work now on we said we're trying to do moral and immoral, so this is kind of getting to my less moral version. So here's the thing we're trying to develop. We're trying to come to patients, let's say somebody who had a heart failure or diabetes, and we said, look, we have this free phone for you. Would you like to exchange your current phone with this free phone, and you have free data plan? And we think people would say yes. And then we said, look, but the thing about this phone is that it only works as long as you keep on taking your medication, exercise, and eat well. And as you stop exercising, eating well, and taking your medication, apps start disappearing. Facebook goes away, Twitter goes away, there's no music. All of a sudden you know that texts are coming, but you can't read them. So, and you know, it's kind of entrapment, right? Because what we're basically doing is we're trying to tempt people to do something that is good for them. We think people at the moment are saying, yes, I want to force my behavior to be better. But once they accept this, every day when you're not compliant is more miserable than the day you are compliant.
And so who's paying for the phone, like the $1,000 if I play along?
So look, the cost of lack of compliance is incredible. And right now it's bared, some by the government, some by insurance companies, some by employers. But the cost is just tremendous. And you know, it's kind of funny, you go to any doctor and you listen to what they say to their patients, it doesn't matter what they diagnose their patients with. What the doctors always say is stop smoking, take your medication on time, exercise, and eat better. It's the one thing we're not good at. Think about insulin. Amazing medication, insulin. If you're diabetic and you're on insulin, this medication is going to dramatically change your life, reduce the chance of blindness and amputation. What's the rate of compliance on mealtime insulin adherence? About 40%. So how do we overcome this barrier is incredibly important. And $1,000 a year is nothing compared to medical costs. So if we take advantage of this device we all get addicted to and use it for good, there's something very good there.
So why do you think this is immoral? Why did you use this in the context of immoral?
So it's slightly immoral. I have more immoral stuff, but it's slightly immoral because people don't recognize what they would want to do later. I mean, if you think about the whole thing about Ulysses' contract, is trapping you now when you have a particular idea, but not letting you change your behavior later, right? So we think about human freedom, it's about your ability to change any time. Now, a company could say, we're giving you a 2-year contract for a phone, there's something that is limiting our freedom, but in this case, it's a little bit, it's saying, don't you want to be adherent to your medication? And you say, yes, you just had surgery, you were just diagnosed, and you say, this is a tool that would help you. But then you get it, and you don't truly recognize how miserable every day would look like if you're not adherent to the medication, and then you're kind of forced to do it. Now, I'm okay with this, but it does have moral
You make me look bad, because my immoral was really immoral. Your immoral is kind of like...
So what's your immoral?
Okay, so I feel bad. I have to find something like so beautiful afterwards to fix the impression. Okay, so here's immoral ones. You took us to the realm of addiction. So we know that addiction is partially in the brain. It's a mechanism that basically wants more reward, that gets less excited by the same thing that you got excited from the day before. So addiction is something that happens to us by design. However, there are moments when addiction is even more likely and really is going to sustain longer. So here's one of those moments. Turns out our brain develops often and much from the day we were born to age 5 or 6. This is when a lot of changes happen. This is when we can learn languages in a much more powerful way. This is why also, but we're born unbaked. So our brain keeps developing after we're born because of the nature of the way humans give birth, which also means that we don't have to start the changes after you're born. We can already start them before. So in the 9 months before.
The mothers with the headphones over the...
This is the mothers with the headphones. No, this is the mom who drinks Diet Coke and gets the baby a little bit more excited about Diet Coke. So when he's born, he likes Diet Coke rather than Pepsi. And knowing that there's in utero, like when your brain develops, actually you already take information and you develop those connections that make you addicted, we can now think of companies or people really exploiting the baby who was not born. That's immoral. That's really immoral. There's no way to make them, like Captain Crunch. Let's use them as like, let's attack this one brand. To make them like something that they don't even know to choose from.
But why would parents want Captain Crunch to their kids to develop? I can imagine parents, for example, wanting their kids to love them unconditionally or to really want to do homework.
So if the parent is in control, they would focus on making you love them more. If they're not, then we can make a baby who's gonna like the chicken orange chicken. If the parent eats the chicken orange, and if we know that it's hard for them to stop, we can basically give it to them for a cheaper price for the certain window. Like mothers of women that are pregnant, normally they go and there's like a sign that says, if you're pregnant, don't go on this thing. This one will say, if you're pregnant, come to this restaurant because we're gonna give you a cheaper item. And what we know is that we actually affect the baby. We create a generation of people who that's immoral. That's not.
That's so you could change you think you can change babies' preferences in the womb before they are born?
We can definitely nudge the connections such that they would be born with I think of a lot of the Terminator, when he looks at the people, he kind of sees outcomes. I see in a way brains when I look at people, and I kind of think of them as like a walking stack of probabilities. Like every choice is just like calculated as we speak. You go to the bar, you look at all the options there, and you say 7, 9, 8, 5, and you kind of immediately start thinking like this. Now, it doesn't mean that you're gonna act rationally just by those numbers, but it means that at any given moment you do have those numbers of probabilities and behavior. And I think in the same way that you can nudge a baby to be born with 60% likeness of that compared to 40% likeness of that, that's
what are the kind of attributes and preferences you can think you could push around, and which ones will be harder to push?
So I think that there's things that we can do that are kind of driving change that are under our control. So the things that we were born with, or the things that we have genetically preference for, they are harder to change, of course. But there are some things that we control that make a big difference. And those, the two that come to mind right away are, you spoke about contracts, I would say, the environment that surrounds us, and specifically people we are nearby. So it turns out that if I have to simplify my belief about how the brains respond to the environment, it can be summarized in the following sentence. If you want to be smart, put yourself next to smart people. If you want to be interesting, sit next to interesting people. Those things rub into our brains. So what we can do to amplify changes is just put ourselves in environments that induce the things we want. And that's a very kind of helpful one tip that I apply myself, Exhibit A, to induce the changes that I want to see in my life.
Okay, so my turn for immorality. So if you think about the things that drive tremendous change in human behavior, probably the number one institution is religion. They've lasted for a long time. They clearly do something right. I mean, they clearly do lots of things wrong from the perspective of the behavior they get people to exhibit. But if you think about the things that people do in the name of religion, it is incredible, right? The force that religion have. So over the last few years, we've gone to observe all kinds of rituals in different tribes and also in Western countries, and kind of trying to think about religion as a force for behavioral change. And one of the interesting things was that in social science we often think about habits. And habits are those things that you either don't think about, picking your nails, something that you don't think about, or something that you think about but not very deeply. Like, your computer beeps and you switch to email, or you see Captain Crunch on the countertop and you eat some. Are we advertising Captain Crunch? Are they a sponsor? But habits are really about not thinking. Versus if you think about religion, a lot of the things in religion are actually about thinking, and actually thinking in a deep way that gives you extra meaning, right? These are what you think about as rituals. And if you think about something like, recycling, if every day you approach recycling and you say, should I recycle today, yes or no, there are many days that you will say, it's too cold, it's too rainy, I don't want to recycle. But if recycling is a ritual and it has a higher order meaning that connects to it, all of a sudden you're not asking yourself about this recycling. You ask yourself, am I the person who recycles? And if you violate recycling for one day, you're actually violating a big principle. Think about Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a kind of a religion. They have a very religious tone to them. Why is the rule for Alcoholics Anonymous no drinking whatsoever? Why can't it be up to half a glass a day is okay? We know it will be crazy if that was the rule, and the reason is that there'll be a market for really big glasses. You'll say to yourself, I'm not drinking in 2 weeks, let me drink extra today. We'll fool ourselves in this flexibility, so we create very strict rules for behavior, and every violation is a violation of the principle, right? And it has a higher order meaning. So we've been trying to create new rituals. So if you think about my immoral suggestion one day is to create a new religion, where people would behave nicer to each other, think about the long term, eat better, take their medications, be nicer to the environment. But in the meantime, until we get to a new religion, we've done a couple of things. One thing we did was we created this ritual for exercise. We get people to rub their hands against each other until we tell them to feel the warmth in their hand. We ask them to take the right hand, to put it on their heart, the left hand on their head, and say something like, by this I pledge my commitment to my heart and mind. It's all kind of new age stuff, but it works. People start exercising more. The other thing we did was we ritualized tying your shoes for exercising. When you exercise, like the first moment of exercising is unpleasant. Let's say running. You got dressed, in the first moment you just start, it's just unpleasant. We said, what if we started with something more pleasant and we made putting on your shoes something that you felt you already achieved something? So we've been ritualizing putting your shoes on, you say something to yourself, and then people put on their shoes. And you know what? If people put their shoes, they go running. It's nobody put their shoes on and say, okay, I had enough, let me go back to bed. So I think there's lots of room for these improvements. We would basically try to create higher order meaning for the things we do, so they're not as mindless and actually have sustained for longer.
So I'm going to ask you in a second, as our final question before we let the audience take questions, what is the most important change that you applied yourself of all of those? Did you try any of those yourself?
I tried lots of things myself. I think that my biggest change across lots of things that I tried has actually been to think about how to say no to things. And think about life, all kinds of requests comes in, there's all kinds of priorities, and the question is, how do you get to live your life in a way that has some resemblance to your priorities, and how do you figure it out? And what happens is when people ask you to do something, and it's a year in advance, you open your calendar, it looks empty. You say, my goodness, I have nothing else to do. That must be higher on my priorities. So trying to live in a way that is closer to your priorities, try to simulate what are the things you actually want to do and should be on your plate. The moment you accepted something to be on your plate, it's kind of too late. You can optimize a little bit, but the question is what kind of things should we engage in and not, and I have a whole procedure around this. Last minute, I'll ask you something. So as a hacker, trying to change behavior, what is kind of the main lesson from hacking to behavioral change?
So I stopped enjoying magic shows because after translating the world of hacking into my life, I started basically looking at the world and saying it to myself the way I saw it rather than the way it is. So I said, you don't see a rabbit, you see a hat and a person holding it. You see a person saying, and suddenly when you start thinking about it this way, most magic tricks reveal themselves. So I often now see tricks and I kind of look at my note. I saw the trick and it's amazing, and then I read my note and I say, wait, you didn't see this happening, that's the trick. I think the same way works for me when I talk about life in general. When I do things I don't want to do, say put things in the calendar a year in advance, and I just go back and I say, okay, let's write down the steps. What happened? An email came. You felt bad. You looked at the calendar. When I break those, it's very easy to tell what was the moment of failure. And if you start also counting them, you have like a little mini diary that you keep for yourself with the things you said, this was a failure, let's go back and see what happened. Then suddenly it's almost intuitive to see, okay, I keep failing in this kind of bucket, let's just fix that. Or taking the Ulysses contract, you allocate just this bucket to someone else. You say, okay, this bucket is where I always say, I do not know how to say no at the moment, so I'm going to go to you and have you just answer this one email, and then you can say that. And I think this is, it's a behavior change that is kind of intuitive to a lot of people, but for me it came from the hacking world because this was how we thought about things at Hacker. Like just, you see a website, there's a password. What things you assume when you see a password? You assume it's the length of your name. Let's try to put 2,000 characters as a person's name. The website crashes. So you kind of break the process to what things are one by one going there, and you say, okay, let's just try to change this, change this, and that's kind of what works for me.
Our time is up, but you told me once that you loved the story of the Baron Münchhausen. as an analogy for life. What was the...
I almost forgot this story. As like so when I was a kid, I was given this book, and it's a book that's telling the story of this Count Munchausen, and he basically goes to a tavern in chapter 1, and he starts telling stories, and every chapter is him telling a different story. And the point of the book is that he's a liar. So pretty much everything that he says has a little lie in that, and the kid is supposed to kind of listen to the story and figure out what's the lie. Chapter, I think 4 or 5, he tells a story of taking his horse and riding from England to France, and there's like a long road that's safe, but there's also an unsafe one going through the swamps, and he takes the unsafe one, and he starts drowning. Both him and his horse are submerged, and he tries to get out of it, and he doesn't find any other solution but to untie his shoelaces and pull himself and his horse from his boots. This is the source of the word bootstrapping. So he kind of says, okay, I'm going to just pull myself up, and that's how he gets out of the swamp. Now, of course, the kids who read this book says, no, this is impossible. You can't pull yourself from your hair or from your boots. And that is true. It's true in the book, but it's also true in life. Very often, when things are not good in our life and we start drowning, we're unable to actually pull ourselves outside from this kind of problem, because we're sinking with everything that we have. And many people say, I need someone to save me. Someone's going to come and just pull me out. I need my therapist to come and just take me out of this. And that's a solution. But the thing that I like the most about this story as an analogy is that it's not necessarily the case that you need to have someone else pull you up, or that you can pull yourself out. Sometimes you just need something that's outside, a little branch that's outside of this swamp that you can actually hold on to and pull yourself out. As long as it's not going down with you, you don't need someone to actually come and take you out. You just need to have someone outside who's going to let you pull yourself out. And in many ways, I think this is a nice thinking that I have when it comes to changing behavior, which is you don't need necessarily to have someone come and tell you those are the things you should do and just do them. Or sometimes it's very hard to do it yourself, but this allocation of resource to someone else, this contract that you make with someone else, this environment that you put yourself in are the equivalent of finding a little branch that you can actually hold on to and get yourself out.
That's a wonderful way to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.